The cockpit was pushed back because of it. The nose existed because of it. Even the centerline of the aircraft was shifted slightly to the right, because the gun sat slightly to the left. When engineers fired the Ju-8 for the first time at full power, something shocking happened. The recoil was so violent it slowed the aircraft in midair. This wasn't a gun mounted on a plane. It was a plane mounted on a gun. Each round was the size of a soda can. Each burst could shred armor like paper. And unlike missiles, the gun couldn't be jammed. It didn't lock on. It didn't lose signal. Where the pilot pointed the nose, destruction followed. But a gun alone wasn't enough. To survive the battlefield, this aircraft would have to do something almost unheard of in modern aviation. It would have to expect to be hit. So the designers did something radical. They stopped trying to avoid damage, and instead planned for it. The cockpit was encased in a titanium bathtub. More than half a ton of armor. Not to stop bullets entirely, but to give the pilot a chance. Critical systems were duplicated. Then triplicate. Hydraulics had backups. Backups had backups. If one engine was destroyed, the other could still fly. If both hydraulics failed, the pilot could still control the aircraft using a mechanical reversion system. No fly-by-wire. No fragile computers. Just cables, rods, force. Even the engines were placed far apart, high above the wings, to reduce infrared signature and prevent a single hit from taking both out. Fuel tanks were self-sealing. Control surfaces were oversized. The landing gear was exposed so it could land even if it failed to deploy. This aircraft was designed not for perfection, but for survival. When the A-10 flew against the A-9, it became clear. The Fairchild design was simpler, tougher, easier to maintain. And in a war where airbases might be destroyed and mechanics exhausted, that mattered more than elegance. In 1976, the Air Force made its choice. The A-10 would become the A-10 Thunderbolt II. But almost immediately, the resistance began. Fighter pilots mocked it. They called it ugly. They called it slow. They called it a flying coffin. Couldn't go supersonic. Couldn't dogfight. It didn't fit the image. To many inside the Air Force, the A-10 was an embarrassment. A relic. Something forced upon them by the Army. And for years, it never fired a shot in anger. Some believed it never would. They were wrong. In 1991, the world watched as the Gulf War began. Smart bombs, stealth aircraft, precision strikes. But on the ground, Iraqi armored divisions dug in. Convoys moved. Tanks hid in the desert. And suddenly, the war needed something different. Something low. Something patient. Something brutal. The A-10 was deployed. And everything changed. Flying just above the sand, A-10 pilots hunted tanks visually. No radar tricks. No complex targeting pods. Just eyes, maps, radios, and coordination with troops below. When the gun fired, the sound was unmistakable. A deep, ripping growl. Not a bang. Not a crack. A sound that soldiers learned to love, and enemies learned to fear. In a single conflict, the A-10 destroyed hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, artillery, radar sites, and it took hits. Many hits. Some returned with one engine. Some with half a wing damaged. Some riddled with holes. But they came back. Again. And again. And again. Ground troops noticed something important. When they called for help, the A-10 didn't just pass through. It stayed. That's when the legend was born. But legends make enemies. Because the same war that proved the A-10's value also marked the beginning of a new era. An era of stealth, of drones, of precision missiles. And once again, voices inside the Air Force began to ask, do we still need this aircraft? Is it too slow for modern war? Too vulnerable? Too old? The retirement plans returned. And this time, they were serious. Yet every time the A-10 was placed on the chopping block, something unexpected happened. Soldiers protested. Commanders objected. Pilots spoke out. Because in real combat, no aircraft had earned trust the way the A-10 had. And the question that refused to go away was simple. If this plane is so obsolete, why does every war keep proving it right? And that leads to the real mystery, because the A-10 isn't just surviving budget cuts. It's surviving an entire philosophy of modern warfare that says it shouldn't exist at all. In Part 2, we'll uncover why newer aircraft keep failing to replace it, why technology didn't kill the Warthog, and why, in some of the most dangerous battlefields on Earth, commanders still ask for one thing when everything goes wrong. Not a stealth jet, not a drone, but the sound of a slow, ugly aircraft circling overhead, refusing to leave, refusing to die. After the Gulf War, the A-10 should have been untouchable. On paper, it had proven everything it was designed to do. Protected troops. It destroyed armor. It survived damage that would have downed almost any other aircraft. But modern warfare doesn't reward loyalty. It rewards trends. And the trend of the 1990s was clear. Speed, stealth, precision. Wars were supposed to be short now. Clean, decisive. The future belonged to aircraft that struck from high altitude, unseen, untouchable. And the A-10 didn't belong to that future. Inside the Air Force, the arguments grew louder. The A-10 was too slow, too vulnerable to modern air defenses, too specialized. Why keep a plane designed to fight Soviet tanks? When the Soviet Union no longer existed, new aircraft, they said, could do everything. Fighter bombers like the F-16. Later, the F-15E, eventually the F-35, multi-role platforms, flexible, advanced. On slides and simulations, it made perfect sense. But war doesn't happen on slides. Then came the Balkans, then Afghanistan, then Iraq. And once again, the battlefield refused to follow the script. Afghanistan exposed a brutal reality. High-altitude bombers could destroy buildings. Drones could observe. But troops were fighting in mountains, in valleys, in villages where enemies blended into civilians. They needed aircraft that could see what they saw. They needed pilots who could talk directly to them, who could orbit for hours, who could react in seconds. Fast jets came screaming in, dropped their ordnance, and left. The A-10 stayed. In the thin Afghan air where performance mattered, the A-10 adapted. Pilots flew lower, slower, closer. They identified friendly positions by smoke, mirrors, radios, sometimes by nothing more than trust. And when everything went wrong, when ambushes happened, when convoys were pinned down, when extraction helicopters couldn't land, there was one aircraft ground troops asked for by name. The Warthog. There's something psychological about the A-10. It doesn't just attack. It reassures. Troops describe hearing it before seeing it. That deep, mechanical growl as it circles overhead. It's not fast enough to vanish instantly. It doesn't disappear into the clouds. It stays visible, present, almost protective. And when the gun fires, there's no confusion, no delay, no doubt. The threat is neutralized immediately, but every advantage the A-10 had also became ammunition for its critics. Flying low made it vulnerable. Staying long meant exposure. Armor added weight. Weight limited speed. Against a peer enemy with advanced air defenses, analysts argued the A-10 wouldn't survive. And that argument wasn't entirely wrong. The problem was, no replacement could do what it did better. The Air Force tried. Again and again. They said the F-16 could do close air support. But F-16 pilots flew faster, higher, with less visibility. They had seconds to identify targets. The A-10 had minutes to study. They carried fewer rounds, less loiter time, and most importantly, they weren't designed to take hits. Then came drones. Persistent, precise, unmanned, perfect on paper. But drones couldn't always respond fast enough. They relied on data links that could be jammed. They couldn't see with human intuition. And when troops were in immediate danger, seconds mattered. Then came the ultimate promise. The aircraft that would replace everything. The F-35. Stealthy, networked, advanced beyond anything before it, and incredibly expensive. The Air Force declared, once again, that the A-10's days were numbered. Retirement plans were announced. Squadrons were scheduled for deactivation. And once again, something strange happened. The army pushed back. Hard. Commanders testified. Soldiers spoke publicly. Congress intervened. Because when soldiers were asked a simple question, what aircraft saved your life? They didn't say multi-role fighter. They didn't say stealth platform. They said, the A-10. The truth no one wanted to admit was uncomfortable. Close air support isn't glamorous. It's messy. It's dangerous. It requires patience, discipline, and humility. It means flying into the most hostile environment possible, for the sake of people on the ground. The A-10 wasn't designed to win wars alone. It was designed to make sure soldiers came home. And that mission never went out of date. Still, time was catching up. Airframes aged. Budgets tightened. Technology marched forward. The question was no longer whether the A-10 was loved, but whether it could survive the wars of tomorrow. Wars with advanced missiles, electronic warfare, contested airspace, wars where flying low might be a death sentence. And that's where the story takes a darker turn. Because even the A-10's greatest supporters began to wonder, what happens when the battlefield finally becomes too lethal? What happens when the very environment the Warthog dominates turns against it? And that brings us to the final, uncomfortable truth. The A-10 doesn't survive because it's perfect. It survives because war keeps demanding something modern doctrine tries to replace. Human presence, judgment, commitment. In the final part, we'll answer the hardest question of all. Not whether the A-10 can survive future wars, but whether modern warfare can survive without something like it. And whether one day soon, the sound that once meant salvation will disappear from the battlefield forever. At some point, every weapon faces the same question. Not whether it still works, but whether the world is still willing to build wars around what it does best. For the A-10, that moment has arrived. Modern battlefields are changing fast. Air defenses are smarter. Missiles are faster. Sensors see farther. Flying low is no longer just dangerous. It's often considered suicidal. And that reality forces an uncomfortable admission. If the A-10 were designed today, it would probably never be approved. Not because it doesn't work, but because it doesn't fit the theory. Military doctrine now revolves around dominance from distance. See first, shoot first, disappear, avoid exposure, minimize risk. But close air support has never been about minimizing risk. It's about accepting it. And that's the paradox. The A-10 survives not because it's aligned with modern doctrine, but because it defies it. Every attempt to replace the A-10 runs into the same wall. Technology can observe. Technology can calculate. Technology can strike. But technology struggles to decide, especially when the difference between enemy and ally is measured in meters, or seconds, or trust. The A-10's greatest weapon was never just its gun. It was the pilot, a human being in the sky, looking down, listening to voices under fire, making decisions that no algorithm can fully replicate. Critics argue that this is nostalgia, that modern systems will eventually match that judgment. That AI will see better, react faster, decide cleaner. Maybe they're right, but war has a habit of exposing gaps between theory and reality. And so far, every time reality pushes back, the A-10 is still there. The truth is, the A-10 doesn't represent the future of warfare. It represents something older, something uncomfortable, that wars are not clean, that soldiers still bleed. That sometimes the only thing that matters is someone willing to fly into danger for them. That's why ground troops never talk about the A-10's radar or its avionics. They talk about what it felt like to hear it overhead, to know someone saw them, to know someone stayed. One day, the A-10 will fly its last mission, not because it failed, but because time eventually claims everything. And when that day comes, it won't be replaced by a single aircraft. It will be replaced by a collection of systems. Drones, jets, satellites, data links, efficient, advanced, impersonal. And maybe that will be enough. But something will be lost. Not on spreadsheets. Not in budgets. But on the battlefield. Because the A-10 was never just a plane. It was a promise. A promise that no matter how chaotic the fight became, someone would come low. Someone would stay close. Someone would take the risk. That's why the A-10 refuses to die. Not because it's indestructible, but because the mission it was built for still exists. And until war no longer demands that kind of courage, the idea behind the Warthog will never truly disappear. Because as long as soldiers fight on the ground, they will always want to hear that sound. Slow, ugly, relentless. And when they do, they won't be asking for the future. They'll be asking for something proven, something human, something that refuses to leave. And that is why the A-10 Warthog refuses to die.